There was a time when people in the wolf territories said the name Calem Draveth the same way they spoke of storms, with respect, with a little fear, and with the quiet understanding that arguing with it was pointless. He was the Alpha King, ruler of the 7 wolf territories, a man who had fought his way to the top before the age of 25, and had held the top so firmly since then that most people had simply stopped imagining anyone else there. He was not a cruel man. That is important to understand. He did not enjoy causing pain, did not seek out conflict for the pleasure of it, did not treat people poorly simply because he could. He was disciplined, calculated, and deeply committed to the well-being of his kingdom. He just did not believe in softness. He believed in results. He believed in strength. He believed that the world responded to power and to very little else. And so far, nothing in his life had proven him wrong. His wolf, a great silver-black creature the elders had named Ashenrath, was considered a gift from the moon goddess herself. Larger than any wolf in living memory, quieter than expected for something so powerful, and deeply loyal to the man it shared a soul with. The two of them had walked through battles, political crises, long winters, and longer silences together, and the bond between them was the one thing in Calem's life he had never questioned. He questioned most things. He questioned people's motives, his advisors' suggestions, the long-term consequences of every decision he made. He was thorough and careful, and rarely wrong. But Ashenrath, the steady presence in his chest, the second heartbeat that had been there since he was old enough to shift for the first time, he had never once thought to question that. Which is perhaps why he did not understand, until much later, what he was putting at risk. The Great Moon convening happened once every 10 years. All 7 alpha leaders came together in neutral territory, settled disputes, renegotiated alliances, and reminded each other that there were rules even powerful people were expected to follow. Calem had attended the last one as a newly crowned king, young and sharp-edged, and very aware that everyone in the room was measuring him. This time, he arrived as someone who no longer needed to prove anything to anyone in that hall. He was wrong about that, as it turned out. One person in that hall still had the power to make him feel completely unsure of himself, and she was not a rival leader, not an elder, not anyone his council had thought to brief him on. Her name was Seraphine Voss. She was the daughter of the Alpha of the Ashvale Pack, one of the smaller and less influential territories at the gathering. She had come with her father as a quiet presence, more observer than participant, and she was not dressed to impress anyone. She was simply there, calm, attentive, watching the room with the kind of eyes that looked like they understood more than they let on. Calem noticed her at the end of the first evening, across the ceremonial hall, and what he noticed first was that she was the only person in the room who had not looked at him. Everyone else, at some point during the evening, had glanced toward the Alpha King, the way people glance toward anything large and significant in a space. Seraphine had been speaking with a group of elders near the far wall, fully present in her own conversation, entirely unbothered by his existence. Ashenrath went absolutely still inside his chest, not frightened, not threatened. Still in the way a person goes still when they hear a sound they have been waiting for, without knowing they were waiting for it. Calem set down his drink and spent the next 3 days quietly unsettled in a way he did not have good language for. He observed her from a careful distance. She laughed at things that were genuinely funny. She listened when people spoke, without looking around the room for someone more important to talk to. She disagreed with one of the senior elders on a point of territory law, and did it so calmly and so clearly that the elder ended up agreeing with her before the conversation was over, and neither of them seemed particularly bothered by the shift. On the 3rd day, they were placed at the same table for a working meal. She introduced herself without ceremony. He told her his name, and she nodded the way someone nods when they hear a name they already know, which is simply to say she acknowledged it and moved on. She asked him what the Ironvale Pack's position was on the northern border dispute, and they ended up talking about territorial law for 2 hours, and it was the most genuinely interesting conversation Calem had experienced in longer than he could honestly remember. When the meal ended and she stood to leave, she said it was good to speak with someone who had actually read the old treaty documents, rather than just summarizing them secondhand. Then she left. She did not look back. That night, Ashenrath pressed against the inside of Calem's chest, the way a wolf presses against a door it once opened. The meaning was not complicated. Calum lay awake and understood exactly what was happening. The moon goddess, in her occasionally inconvenient wisdom, had placed his fated mate at a gathering in the middle of the most politically sensitive period of his reign. The next morning, his head council found him before breakfast. They had, of course, noticed. Advisors notice everything. They laid out the situation with the same organized clarity they used for every difficult briefing. Seraphine's pack, the Ashvale, was small and financially struggling. Her father's health was declining. The territory they held sat directly beside a rival kingdom that had been looking for an opportunity to expand. Marrying into the Ashvale would communicate weakness at exactly the moment when Calum needed the remaining alpha leaders to see strength. There was another option. Lady Mora of the Hyphen pack. Strong territory, solid political connections. A family that had been seeking an alliance with the Iron Vale for 2 generations. A marriage there would bring the 6th territory under peaceful Iron Vale governance, double their military access, and close the eastern border threat in one move. It was, from every measurable angle, the correct decision. Calum asked them to leave the room. He stood at the window for a long time. Ashenrath was not still this time. Ashenrath moved inside him with a restless, heavy energy that Calum had no previous experience managing, because no threat had ever felt quite like this. Not external, not something to fight, just a deep and aching awareness of what he was about to choose to walk away from. He was the Alpha King. He had not built 7 territories into a single kingdom by letting feeling override strategy. He had made hard choices before, and he would make them again. That was what leadership required. He signed the betrothal papers to Lady Mora 3 days later. He did not speak to Seraphine before the convening ended. He told himself that unspoken things faded, that the bond would settle into something manageable, that he had made the right call and would not spend energy second-guessing it. Ashenrath said nothing. Wolves cannot speak in human words, but the silence from that direction was different from the silence Calum was used to, and he noticed it. The months that followed were successful, by every measure that mattered in a kingdom. The Hyphen alliance held firm. The 6th territory transitioned smoothly. The eastern border threat retreated when it became clear the Iron Vale now had the military strength to make any move costly. His council was pleased. His people were stable. Everything was, by every available metric, going well. Ashenrath grew quieter. It was gradual enough that Calum told himself it was nothing. A season, a cycle, some natural variation he had not experienced before, simply because he had never paid close enough attention. He told himself this for 3 months. Then Ashenrath stopped showing up to their morning runs, not refusing exactly, just absent, present enough that Calum could still feel him, but distant in the way a conversation partner goes distant when they have stopped engaging and are simply waiting for something to be over. On the night of the blood moon, a night when every wolf in the territory was expected to shift, when the pull of the moon was strong enough that young wolves who hadn't yet fully trained their shifts would do it involuntarily, Calum went to the forest alone, stood in the clearing where he had always shifted since he was a boy, and called for Ashenrath. Nothing happened. Not a slow shift, not resistance, nothing. The place inside him where Ashenrath lived was there, but it was like reaching into a familiar room and finding it empty. The furniture was gone, the light was off. The room was still his, but whatever had filled it had stepped out, and he had no way of knowing if it was coming back. He stood in that clearing for a long time, then he walked back to the palace, went to his study, and did not tell a single person what had happened. He ruled for the next 6 months, as a man quietly managing a wound no one could see. He was still effective. He was still sharp. He was still, by most external accounts, the same Calum Draveth who had always sat on the obsidian throne. But something was different in the quality of his stillness. Before he had been still because he was certain. Now he was still because the alternative was showing people how lost he actually felt. A border matter eventually required him to travel to the edge of Ashvale territory. He told himself it was routine. He did not examine the feeling underneath that. Seraphine met him at the border hall. Her father had passed earlier that year, and she was leading the pack now, calmly, clearly, the same way she had done everything he had observed her doing. She greeted him with the politeness owed to a visiting king, and the absence of warmth ode to a man who had chosen not to acknowledge her existence when it mattered. The meeting was professional. He respected her for not making it more difficult than it needed to be. As he was preparing to leave, one of the Ashvale elders stepped forward, an old woman, white-haired, whose eyes carried the particular steadiness of someone who has decided they have nothing left to fear from social consequences. "Your wolf is gone," the old woman said, not quietly. Clearly, in the open air, where several people could hear. "We can all feel it. You have been walking around for months as half of what you were, and I imagine you already know why." Calum said nothing. He waited. "The moon goddess does not take things from people as punishment," the elder continued. "She takes them as truth-telling. A wolf given to love a particular soul cannot survive long inside a man who has decided that soul is not worth the risk. Ashenrath was not only yours. He was also an answer, her answer, to a question you asked every year you spent building a kingdom for no one. When you chose not to receive the answer withdrew. That is not cruelty, that is honesty." She said nothing more. She stepped back. Calum thanked the pack for their hospitality and rode back toward his territory with his jaw set and his expression neutral, the way it always was, the way he had trained it to be. That night he sat in his study for a very long time without doing anything. No papers, no reports, no planning. He just sat with the silence inside his chest and allowed himself, for the first time since the blood moon, to fully acknowledge what it meant. He had been afraid. That was the honest answer. He had stood at the edge of something real and unfamiliar, and chosen the thing he already knew how to do, which was rule, manage, control, build, because those things did not require him to be uncertain. Love required uncertainty. It required the willingness to be changed by someone else, to need something you could not guarantee, to give a part of yourself over to something you could not fully control. He had built an entire personality out of not doing those things, and when the moment came to do them, he had filed the feeling under risk and walked away. He wrote Seraphine a letter, not an apology built around wanting forgiveness. He understood clearly that forgiveness was not his to request, not an explanation designed to make himself look better. Just the truth, that the bond had been real, that she had been real, that what he had felt in those 3 days had been the most alive he had felt in years, and that the choice to walk away from it had been his alone, and he did not intend to make her carry any part of it. He told her the elder was right. He signed it with his given name, Calum, and not his title, because titles had been the problem all along. She did not write back. He had not expected her to. He ruled differently after that. Without Ashenrath's instincts to move through, Calum was forced to slow down in ways he had never had to slow down before. He asked questions he would previously have considered unnecessary. He sat with uncertainty longer before making decisions. He started to notice that his counsel, given the chance to actually speak rather than simply confirm his conclusions, had useful things to say. The kingdom did not fall apart. It actually, in small and hard-to-measure ways, got better. And 3 years after the night in the forest clearing, when the wolf did not come, on a quiet evening during the autumn consecration, when the sky was the particular deep blue that happens just before stars appear, something shifted in the hollow space inside his chest. Not Ashenrath returning, not fully, not the great presence he had carried since boyhood, something smaller, a warmth, a faint and careful thing, like an ember, deciding whether to grow or go out, watching from a distance to see what kind of air surrounded it. Calum sat very still, and did not demand anything of it. He had learned, finally, that some things cannot be commanded. He did not know if Ashenrath would ever fully return. He did not know if the man he was still becoming would be someone the moon goddess eventually chose to bless again. He did not know what Seraphine's life looked like now, or if she was well, or if time had settled into something kind for her. He hoped so. That hoping was new for him, wishing well-being on someone he would never be able to give it to directly. It felt humble in a way he was slowly getting used to. What he did know was this: the most powerful thing he had ever done was not uniting 7 territories, not winning the battles that earned him his throne, not building the alliances that made his kingdom secure. The most powerful thing he had ever done was sit alone in a forest clearing with nothing, no wolf, no title, no armor of certainty, and finally admit to himself that he had been wrong. That, too, is a kind of strength. It just takes longer to learn,